Hello, I'm Langston, and I'm back on my channel, Military Election Forecasting. And today I'm be talking about the decade-long overestimation of Nikki Haley. So before I dive straight into this, I want to, tell everyone who watches this video to subscribe. I oftentimes get a lot of views, but those views don't oftentimes translate into subscribers, and it would really benefit me if you guys subscribe to my YouTube channel. It takes a lot of time management to manage being in the military as well as being in college. And managing this YouTube channel. I do really appreciate doing this, and I really appreciate, you guys' support as well as reading you guys' comments, even if you disagree with me. I just really enjoy, being on this space. So please subscribe to this channel, and I really appreciate if you did it. So diving straight into this, we're going to be talking about why Nikki Haley was so overestimated, what she was expected to do, and how she failed to achieve that. So Nikki Haley burst onto the Republican scene back in 2010, winning her gubernatorial race in the state of South Carolina. And with that, she was seen as a bright spot for the Republicans in the future. She represented the opposite of how Republicans were perceived. She was an Asian American woman, obviously one of the first Indian Americans to be elected governor in the country, as well as being a Republican, she didn't represent the perception of what Republicans were. Most people perceive Republicans as usually a party of white people, in particular white men, and she was the opposite of that. So she offered, you know, a correlation to what Barack Obama had been perceived at the time as, having the first black president. And she brought much needed diversity to the Republican Party. But that diversity did not translate into diverse votes. And that was something that Republicans never really gained what they thought they could gain with having someone like her on their side. And putting her on a presidential ticket has been something that Republicans have dreamed of. She was seen as someone who could unite the Romney coalition with the Trump coalition and put together a Republican dominating force. But as we've seen, she has not been able to do that. She's not been able to ever gain mainstream in the Republican Party or become likely to win a presidential election if she was the Republican nominee. So we're talking about why she failed to do all of those things. So you go back to 2010, you'll see that she won her race by less than 5 points. And, this was a very poor margin. This is 2010. This is the most Republican year in history. Republicans picked up 63 House seats in this election. And even with Republicans picking up 63 House seats, she only won by 4.5 points in a Republican state that Donald Trump won by double digits. Every Republican has won South Carolina by double digits, and she couldn't even win by more than 5 points in the most Republican friendly environment ever. She was hit with some very unfair scandals during this race, but it is worth pointing out that she really performed very bad in this state. And also, I want to point out that this was a year where turnout, in particular from Black voters, was really bad in South Carolina, and she still won by such a small margin. So, with the Democratic base not turning out in South Carolina and you performing that bad, it is worth noting. And she did perform better in 2014, but she still did not outperform other Republicans in the state. Nikki Haley has been very overrated by a lot of conservatives, and the map isn't back up to what they're trying to build for her. And the reason why she failed to do what Republicans expected of her was because conservatives don't necessarily understand how people of color and how other demographics feel about the Republican Party. You know, people all people see when they look at Nikki Haley from a Democratic perspective and from a minority perspective is they see a person of color, a brown face with a white mind, and they don't realistically see her as diversifying. They don't see themselves in her. They see her as the enemy and a betrayer to themselves, and that's a problem that Republicans often face with running people of color conservatives. Um, I want to point out that obviously I'm not an Asian American, so I cannot give a perspective of Asian Americans. It is worth noting that Asian Americans do not vote for Asian American conservatives, but I can speak for the Black community, and we've seen with. I can't speak for the Black community, obviously, but I can give a perspective as a Black person. And with Herschel Walker as well as John James, Republicans tried this as well in Michigan and Georgia, and they lost both times because not only do people of color conservatives struggle the same with conservatives, do they motivate their own racial demographic to turn out at a higher rate because people see them as betrayers to their community. They see them as, and from the Black community's perspective, as Uncle Toms and sellouts, and people are motivated to turn out to stop someone who they feel like has betrayed their community from winning. So Republicans have really struggled to appeal to people of color as well as change their image, even with diversifying their own image. And something that Republicans wanted the most in Nikki Haley is to unite all the sections of the Republican Party. And to be honest, that's impossible. And it's the same thing from the Democratic Party. It's impossible to unite Obama, Joe Biden, and Bill Clinton's coalition, the same way that it's impossible to unite, the former conservative coalition with the Trump coalition. They're completely different with completely different objectives. So for Republicans, trying to create something that is practically impossible just does not even make sense. They have to come up with a winning strategy that works for them. Why she was propped up so big was, in 2012, Mitt Romney, he lost pretty big to Barack Obama. And, the main reason Mitt Romney lost was even though he dominated the suburbs at the time, he was not too strong for turning out rural voters as well as doing well with the working class. And you saw really high turnout from Black voters, some Hispanic voters, from people of color across the country. And the thing was, at the time, if Mitt Romney would have had Ronald Reagan's electorate, he would have won huge. But he did not have Ronald Reagan's electorate because America diversified tremendously since then. And it did so even more so as of now. And with that, Republicans are trying to come up with a way to counteract that. And realistically, there really isn't one. And many people, even to this day, think that she's one of the most electable Republicans. And clearly, looking at her past performance, looking at this race, she's clearly not the most electable Republican. And I do want to point out that we've seen Democrats and Republicans underperform. We've seen, her underperform in South Carolina. We also seen Gavin Newsom and Kathy Hochul underperform in Democratic safe states. So I'm not going to, compare that to how she performed nationally. But Nikki Haley does not realistically have too much of a path to 270 because of the things I brought up. So when looking at all of these states, Nikki Haley is not a strong candidate for really any of the swing states. And from starting out west, Nikki Haley is going to really struggle in the rural areas in Nevada, in my opinion. She's not going to be able to get the same amount of rural voters to turn out for her as Donald Trump is. And this is a big problem because Republicans, by and large, cannot put together a coalition where they can get Trump numbers in rural areas while stagnating the suburbs. Because the main reason the suburbs are trending left is because they're diversifying. And as long as they keep diversifying, the more people of color in these suburbs, the more Democratic votes there are. So Republicans cannot win in these areas unless they can increase in those areas, and they're not being able to do that. So with that, Republicans would definitely, she would not be able to do as well in these rural areas as Donald Trump. She would not perform too well in Washoe County. And as we saw in 2022, even with moderate candidates like Joe Lombardo, he only did better in Nevada because Hispanic turnout dropped. So in an election with better Hispanic turnout, he would have lost by more than Trump. So with that, she would not be able to do well with these voters in Clark County. We've seen moderate conservatives like Joe Lombardo still struggle here. So with that, she would easily lose Nevada, probably by maybe even more than 5 points. In Arizona, similar to what you saw with Mitt Romney in 2012 in Arizona. I think that Nikki Haley could perform well here. I think Arizona is trended too much against Republicans because something that Nikki Haley struggles with is she is she's tried to brand herself as a traditional conservative while trying to appeal to the Trump base, and it's hurt her with both bases because she's lost a lot of support from the traditional conservative base while never being popular amongst the Trump base. And with that, I think that Arizona would be a toss up, but she would not perform well with these voters in Maricopa County just because of how they perceive her. I think she performed a lot better than Trump, and she not do well in the rural areas, but I could see her still being able to narrowly win here. I think she hold on in Texas. I definitely think she do better in the suburbs than Donald Trump, but she would still do worse than Donald Trump 2020 just because these suburbs are going to continue to trend left, but they would not trend as left as they did in 2020, obviously. So yes, she might do 1, 2, maybe 3 points worse in the suburbs than Donald Trump, but she would outperform what Donald Trump would be able to do if he ran. So I definitely think that she could maybe hold on in Collin County, but I could see her losing. But I definitely think that she would lose. She would be able to hold on in Denton County. She do worse in Fort Worth just because of the trends. She do worse in San Antonio and Houston, and all the cities. And she would not be able to get out. These rural voters, like these rural voters in Texas, would not turn out for her. But for the most part, she would easily be able to win there. In the Rust Belt, she is a very weak candidate here. Like she does not have the ability to turn out rural voters to connect with these working class voters. And the sad thing is, you go back to 2016, and yes, this is an election where Hillary Clinton did really bad with those voters, and she also collapsed with turnout from urban Black voters. But the sad thing is, you look at this. 288,000 votes, a very low turnout performance in Milwaukee. I think that this is enough black turnout to beat Nikki Haley. Like Nikki Haley would not even be able to get enough rural turnout to overcome this. Like even with bad black turnout in the Rust Belt, Nikki Haley would still probably lose just because she would not be able to get a lot of rural voters out. And I think that she stopped the suburbs from trending dramatically to the left, but she would still lose those areas pretty convincingly. And with that, she would easily lose in the Rust Belt with her not being able to get out the same amount of margin rural voters as Donald Trump, as well as do well with the working class. And not being able to dramatically change the suburbs. And with that, she'd easily lose here. And in Georgia, a state that is oftentimes overestimated for traditional conservatives, Georgia is trending against Republicans because of the black population growing. Like that is the main reason that Georgia is trending dramatically to the left. These suburbs in the Atlanta area have become rapidly more black. We're talking about Henry County. This county has quadrupled, its black population has quadrupled in 20 years, as well as Newton and Rockdale. Like these southern Atlanta counties have just dramatically changed demographically. And this is one of the few places that Mitt Romney did worse than John McCain, even though 2012 was a much more Republican year. In 2000, it was a blue wave year. He still did worse than John McCain. And I do want to point out that Barack Obama was a candidate of a lifetime for black voters. So I don't think Mitt Romney is to blame for doing worse here. But no conservative can stop these suburbs from trending left just because when you have a demographic group that's growing, not that breaks 90 to 10 for the Democratic Party, you can't stop that regardless of who you run because those voters are never going to vote for the Republican, as we've seen with any Republican candidate. And people oftentimes point to Brian Kemp, but Brian Kemp had an R+6 electorate. When you have a when you have an electorate that Trump would have won by 6 points and you only win by seven, that's not necessarily good at all because David Perdue outperformed Donald Trump by 1 point. But when black turnout sorted in the Georgia runoff, he lost. So the problem for Republicans in Georgia is they cannot overcome, these very diverse, these dramatically diversifying counties, not even just diversifying, more so blackifying counties. And with that, that's trending this whole area against Republicans, as well as in the other major parts of Georgia, because Georgia's an extremely racially polarized state. I do want to point out, I think Nikki Haley would do a little bit better with these, more educated, wider exurban counties. Like Republicans are still dominating here, but they're dominating here by a little bit less. But I think she'd do a little bit better here. Obviously, these counties aren't necessarily diversifying that much, but it's not enough votes here to win statewide. And this is something that Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue found out because they did better in those areas, but they still lost by even more than Donald Trump because they're not going to do as well in the rural areas, and they're going to continue to do worse in the suburbs just because these areas are becoming more black. So with that, Nikki Haley would definitely lose in Georgia, and North Carolina is a very similar thing to Georgia because we've seen her underperform in South Carolina, and part of the reason that is because she cannot get out the same amount of rural turnout as Donald Trump, and it's something that Ted Budd struggled with. The Ted Budd, he was only able to survive because of turnout collapsing from black voters. So with Nikki Haley, she would not be able to do well in the rural areas. And I don't think the suburbs would be too horrible for her. But you saw with a candidate that was not nowhere near extreme as Donald Trump, Ted Budd, still do very bad in the suburbs. And we saw this in 2022 where Ted Budd really struggled in these suburban areas. Like he did not do better really anywhere than Donald Trump. And the main reason he did better in places was because of turnout differentials. Obviously, when you have turnout going down from the Democratic base, and particularly being black voters, you're going to do better. But with actual suburban counties, he did not perform better than Donald Trump at all. He just was able to benefit from the Democratic electorate not coming out to vote. Very similar thing with Republicans in Nevada as well. And with that, Nikki Haley, if anything, would seem likely to lose there as well because she would struggle with turning out these rural voters. And with North Carolina continuing to diversify like Georgia, she would probably struggle there. So Nikki Haley is a candidate that's weak in the Sun Belt and in the Rust Belt. And anyone who really paid attention to politics could have seen this coming. For Republicans, they have to come up with a way to maximize Trump's base while not being able to drive people of color and suburban voters to the polls. And that seems something that's very unlikely. And for Nikki Haley, she doesn't have the math to counteract that. And her being put with an impossible task was not her fault, but it is worth noting that it's something that she will definitely end up struggling with. And with that, her attacking Donald Trump, many people think that she's just running to be a vice president. Many people point to the fact that she was also a Trump loyalist. So she's really cutting her voter base from both sides of the GOP and diminishing her chances of winning in the future. And that's all I wanted to talk about. So thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. Make sure you have a nice day, you guys. Please like, subscribe, and comment down below. And have a great day. Goodbye.